Shifting Design, our 4-day virtual design summit. My name is Jackson Taylor and I'll be your host for this panel. But first, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm dialing in from today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. So yesterday, you might have caught a couple of amazing panels and sessions on inclusive design. If you missed those, don't forget to follow us at Designing Deputy on Instagram. We've already posted, I believe, some videos from those sessions. But today, we're on day 4 of the panel, which is really focusing on showing the way. And for this session, we'll be talking about moving into management and the journey from being an individual designer or an individual contributor to a design manager. And we'd like to thank ADPList as well for working with us and helping us find such amazing guests today. For everybody in the audience, please submit questions via the Q&A feature in Zoom. The ones that go through chat are pretty easy for us to miss. So if you put them there, we will find them. But first, I'd love to introduce the guests for the day. So first off, we have Millie. So Millie Schmidt is a product and design leader based in Melbourne, Australia. We also have Mitch today, who is a new user experience manager at SimpleNexus based in Lehi, Utah. And we have Tara Kelly, who is a product design leader and now author based in Oakland, California. And I think we've been lucky enough that everybody who's signed up for this panel today will receive a copy of Tara's book when that's released via email, I believe. So I guess to get into it and to kick off, I'd love to hear what led you all to a career in design. Maybe we could start with Tara first.
Hi, so thanks for having me. It's so fun to be here. What led me to a career in design? I sort of stumbled into it. I studied photography, and then I started bouncing around, living in some different countries, and tried my hand at programming and realized that I wanted to be a lot closer to the user. And so that was a process, and I wound up in design. It wasn't until I moved back to the US about 10 years ago that all of a sudden there was a name for the work that I was doing. So UX research, user-centered design, all of these things didn't really resonate when I was starting. So it was exciting to get here and then say, oh, this is a real job. And apparently I do it. So it was exciting.
Thank you. And Mitch, how about yourself?
Yeah, my path was kind of a long one. I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I just stumbled into computer science, and I did that as my degree in college. And halfway through the program, I learned about this, human-computer interaction. I started learning about this thing called UX, and I didn't realize it was a career. So I thought to be a UX designer, I had to, be the programmer, the front-end developer. And I finished my degree and I started as a developer. And then there was a UX designer at my company, and I was like, wait, that's a job? I can do that full time and get paid. So yeah, I kind of had a whirlwind path where I was a developer, I was a product manager, but ultimately most passionate about UX. And so happy to be in the UX domain.
Great stuff. And Millie, how about yourself?
Yeah, very familiar stories. I also was originally, before I got into tech, I was in writing and editing because I wanted to do a career that used my skills. And I found that working in publishing was actually very intense and less creative than I thought. It was very much very, very commercial, and I wasn't really getting that problem solving kind of energy. So part of my role was to kind of redo this publication's website, and I ended up going to work with the company who made the website and learned how to make websites. And this was 10, 12 years ago, both of you and UX, I'd never met a UX designer. There weren't UX designers at any of the companies I was at or working with. And when I went to work with one of the clients of this kind of web agency, which was my first tech job, I was working as a front-end engineer, and the designer who I was working with was very much we're talking about, the time before Figma. He was doing his designs in InDesign and sending them to me as like, JPEGs, and I was implementing them. And I asked a lot of questions, and eventually he said, you're asking a lot of very good questions. Maybe you should actually be the designer. And then I, like Mitch, I think, went and kind of discovered that UX and like Tara as well was a thing that potentially I was already doing a lot of, and I found kind of the words for it and the right people and trained up, and then kind of that was the right fit for me, and I ended up hovering kind of around UX, a little bit technical, a little bit producty, and over the recent years it's been much more management focused. But yeah, the similar journey.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like that's one of the kind of exciting things about this field is you have so many people coming from different backgrounds and bringing some of those skills from their previous lives in and, contributing in a different way to kind of moving things forward. So maybe if we could stay with you for a minute, Millie, what then was kind of the process for you to then go into design management? Like, how did you kind of go from individual contributor to being a manager?
Yeah, so I've been really lucky to work at a lot of startups that were on growth journeys, and I think like Tara, I've often been like the first designer in, and going from 0 to 1 is a whole process of educating people around you about what design is and like how it fits into the process, and working with the teams and individuals. But then as you grow, obviously, if you've proven out design, you need to then hire in more designers, and then the question is like who will manage them. So that's kind of driven some of it, is just being like, well, it seemed like the right fit, that I would be the right person to manage them. And then the other side of it is really me kind of following my nose and finding that a lot of the skills that I really liked about UX were actually translatable to management skills. So the things that I really enjoy are like workshop design and facilitation and listening and interviewing and feedback. And that's all like very much kind of, you could see all those skills fitting into a manager's, PD as well. And I love, the visual aspect of design. I love being on the tools, but I think increasingly now, having done, 10 years of like on the tools design, I feel like my value is better with educating the next generation of designers and helping to share my experience with them, rather than being the person who is still kind of doing the actual design work.
Absolutely. And Tara, you've kind of written the book on being the first designer in the company. Maybe what did your kind of journey from being that kind of individual contributor to designer look like? Was that kind of similar, or?
I would say it was, the end part was similar. So I started off in a sort of an entrepreneurial role. I had a couple of companies. In the first one, I was managing people. Some of them were designers, some of them were marketers. I was just sort of managing everybody who was not an engineer. And that was my first experience just doing any sort of management. And I will admit, I was terrible at it when I first started, right? So it was a big, huge learning curve. And so then from there, I went back into sort of like being more of an individual contributor. But, as Millie said, you are the first designer hired in, and then all of a sudden now you need to grow a team, you need to hire people, you need to set up the entire organization and the function. So I sort of tried to get out and got roped back in. I'm glad I did, though. It's being the manager, as Millie said, has become the, my favorite part of the job. So
it's great to hear. And Mitch, I think my understanding is that your kind of journey to being a manager is kind of a bit more recent. Can you kind of tell us about, how that happened and what that looks like?
Yeah, I'm probably the freshest new one on the panel here. I literally made the transition last month, 6 weeks ago. And I don't know if I can say I've transitioned, because I think I'm still transitioning. I think it's more of a process, even if your title changes. It's definitely a transition. And I think just kind of over time, one of my mantras has always kind of been people over pixels. I really enjoy doing the designs, putting all the pixels together to create awesome stuff. But as I've been kind of growing, I've just realized more and more what I really enjoy, the collaboration, mentoring other designers, working with people, helping them progress. And I've kind of done that informally outside my company as well as within. And over time, it just kind of dawned on me that, I could just spend all day just being with people and helping them, instead of necessarily being inside of a design tool. And so I just kind of started doing some proactive things. And I started wondering, what does a manager do? And, obviously hiring is a very important aspect, sourcing candidates. And I was kind of thinking, my company was growing. We're still hiring a lot. And I was kind of thinking, how do I, find people and tell them to come apply and bring them in? And so, I ended up just creating a prototype as kind of a slide deck showcasing my team and our culture and our values. And that's resonated with a lot of candidates. And nobody really asked me to do that. I just kind of saw a need of, hey, this is something that could help our company. And, I just kind of went ahead and did it. And in a sense, I was kind of just already doing some of those things that a manager does. And so I kind of made that transition more natural when it officially happened.
Yeah, that's great to hear. I feel like for a lot of people, it seems to be that you kind of start to get some of those experiences before you get the official title. And by the time that you get there, you kind of realize that it's not completely a fresh new kind of role. And I guess even though you've said you're only a month in, do you have any advice that you would give to new managers or even to yourself a couple of months ago?
Yeah, preparation's helpful. I mean, there's so many great resources out there. I mean, this panel, there's a book I was reading from, I can't remember how to pronounce her last name, but like Julie Zuo, or called The Making of the Manager, that it's really geared towards UX designers becoming managers. And it kind of preps you through some of those awkward scenarios you might encounter where, one day you're, designer with your peers, and then the next they're reporting to you. And sometimes that's kind of awkward, or, it can be awkward. And I think, there's a lot of things you can do to prepare or even just find out, would I enjoy this? I knew there was gonna be a lot of things. Like I kept hearing from every manager I talked to, your calendar is going to be triple booked and you're always going to be busy. And I kind of thought, yeah, that, I don't think that'll happen. No, it happened. So just kind of mentally being ready for that. And, just talking to other managers and figuring out, do they enjoy it? What do they like? What did they not like? What has it been like? So for anyone that's here today listening to this panel, this is what you do.
Fantastic. And Millie, what advice would you give to new managers?
To new managers, your work is really going to be primarily having conversations. So, be ready to be talking and listening all day. You'll be definitely doing some, documentation, and like Mitch said, preparation is really important, but I think those are important for almost any job. I think the key about management is really that I think the main part of it is about relationship building, and that's with your direct reports, but it's with your peers and it's with the people you report to as well. So you're constantly working in that kind of emotional layer. And I think the other thing is, one of the critical skills for managers is feedback. So you want to be learning how to give feedback really well, but also how to receive it and ask for it. And that's, it sounds simple, but actually I think feedback is a bit of an art. And, being able to give someone constructive feedback as a manager is going to be one of the most important things that you ever do, but it's not always going to be easy. And one of the biggest, I think, mindset shifts for me was learning to kind of sit with discomfort in some meetings with people and allow people to have feelings without them necessarily affecting you and making, putting you completely off balance. So it takes a level of kind of, I think, resilience and emotional kind of maturity to be able to get there. But it's an absolutely amazing transformative skill if you can learn how to do it.
Yeah, so good to hear. Tara, how about yourself? Any other advice that you would have new managers as well?
So, a lot has been covered, and I think the main skill that you need is the main skill that you need is to take your problem solving, because most of us love problem solving. It's sort of, why we're in this job. You love people, you empathize with people, you like to make people happy, but you also problem solve, right? And you have to take that problem solving and take it up many levels, right? And if you're thinking of it as a puzzle, it's sort of like a puzzle that's 12 different puzzles, and they're all connected by 2 little pieces here and there. It's this giant web of like systemic problems that you need to have in mind. And so some examples of that are, like, one of the puzzles is your team, right? And inside of that, there's the individual people in your team. Another one is where your function, so where design sits in the company. So that can be logistically, like, who do you report to, but it's also, how is it perceived in the company? And you have to manage that, right? You have to make sure if the reputation of the team is slipping or gaining, you're aware and you're balancing it out. And then you also have, I would say, the puzzle with other very specific teams. Like if you're in a B2B, you've got sales team. Like sales team doesn't want you talking to their prospects. And so you have to figure out, how do you recruit people who are users who are potentially on an upgrade path? And are you allowed to talk to them? So there's just a lot of moving pieces. And so the more strategic you get, the more of these moving pieces that there are. So you really need to, the problem solving is just top of the list. Followed only perhaps by empathy, right? Because all of those people with all of those moving pieces have their own deal going on, right? So you can't just go at them, right? Like if the sales team is upset with you or upset with somebody else, you need to be unflappable, hear it, handle it, right? So within the context of everything else. So problem solving for sure.
Can I comment on that, Jackson?
Yeah.
Please.
One thing that I think is really interesting about that is I fully agree that, like, I think design managers are people who want to solve problems and find, bigger and bigger problems. But one of the things that I found critical as well is, picking your battles a little bit and noticing when there's a problem that you want to solve that maybe is out of scope for you or is actually like not going to benefit you to try and solve. And I think as a manager, you do get access to bigger problems. You get to see problems that you maybe didn't see before, but then also learning which ones you can solve and which ones you can't, and apportioning your energy correctly is probably, because otherwise you're just going to end up frustrated and impatient, and that will leak out into everything else that you do. So being able to figure that out is probably one of those important bits.
I would definitely second that, because you're always going to have more problems than you have time and energy. Delegation becomes important, but even, when you're delegating responsibilities, there's just always more problems than you have the capacity. And so, prioritization and knowing which battles to fight and when, it's so important. Timing is also just such a big part. It might take a while. It might be a long-term game of helping your company reach maturity to really utilize the power of design. And you have to be willing to play that long-term game. Something that was it's a good idea now may have not been a good idea several years ago, or even if you have a good idea right now, it might not work until next year. It's just a very long-term game, and being strategic to really enable you and your team to succeed.
I think the long-termness is really, really important there. Like when you're working at the interface level, you're reasonably short-term in the way that you're thinking compared to the problems that you're going to be solving as a manager. And that's why I think patience is always the skill that I call out is just a critical one, because I think you're now thinking, okay, that's a major problem and it's going to take me maybe 3-4 years to get to the state that I need it to be in. And you have to plan that out and figure out how to move through that plan. That's going to take you and everyone else a really, really long time to do. And to kind of cultivate that mindset is going to require a big shift inside of you about how you think about problem solving as well.
Yeah, I mean, I so strongly relate to this. I feel like, working at a tech company and a, relatively small one, there's like more problems to solve than anybody has time for. You have a wealth of problems, but you have to kind of choose your battles, otherwise you'll just burn yourself out and be working kind of 18-hour days. I'd love to hear a little bit about you were kind of talking about taking that really long view on the problems that you're trying to solve. How do you keep yourself accountable and knowing that you're kind of progressing towards those goals that you have when they do have kind of such long timelines? And anybody jump in if you've got any thoughts.
I've got a thought. You need a plan. So, whether you have it written down or not, whether you have it, where, how, whatever it is, you do need a plan. So when you come into the role, there's going to be some objectives and some that maybe you want to accomplish. And there's objectives that the company needs to accomplish. There's goals in the product that need to be accomplished. So you've got these like multi-track things going on. So you need a plan. So when you come in, like take some benchmark measurements of that stuff when you get in. And then you just periodically check them over time. I do find talking about having a plan is helpful when you are dealing with other stakeholders. That doesn't mean you're always saying like, oh, according to my plan, because they get pretty annoyed with that. But, if you are sitting down with them over lunch, you are having a chat with some of the other, functional leaders, they're going to be talking about their goals and objectives for their functions. And so you should have a plan as well. And it should be shared with them.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what people talk about when they're saying design needs a seat at the table in leadership, and this is what design strategy is like understanding how the strategy for design in your company relates to the strategy for the company overall, and in the same way that the strategy for how to grow revenue might exist, you also want your strategy for how to grow design and develop design exists, and being able to explain it to people so that they understand it, not just at the leadership level, but for your teams. Understanding as well. So they understand why you're making certain decisions and why are you hiring these kind of people, or why is this person getting a promotion? That'll make sense if they understand what your overall strategy is. And that is a big part of leadership, is like being able to think strategically, but also communicate that strategy effectively.
Kind of a funny answer also to this question is honestly just kind of journaling or documenting or just recording moments in your life. Or sometimes, I go back and like, what was my mindset 2 years ago? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought that was the biggest problem in the world. Like, we're so past that. And, obviously this isn't as proactive, but it does help you retroactively just realize like, wow, I've come a long way. The company's come a long way. The people I'm over have come a long way. It's just kind of a fun opportunity with, maybe just once a quarter, just kind of write down, what are your biggest challenges? What are your biggest successes? And then just review that. And you just over time, you realize, wow, like we really have progressed. We really are making progress. Or maybe you're not making progress. And then, something needs to change. You got to adapt that strategy. You got to adapt that plan if you're in the same place you were 1 year ago. So it can always be helpful to have that reality check.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump to one of the questions that have come through via the Q&A from anonymous attendee. How do you manage upper management expectations when they keep expecting more and more from you or from your team?
I feel like this is maybe a question that's coming from a personal place for this attendee, and I definitely relate. I think it's kind of, in some ways it's good. Like if people aren't expecting more and more of you, then like you're not growing and your company's kind of not on a pathway to growth. But obviously sometimes it can feel like too much. Like if someone's expecting what you think is too much of you and your team, then that's a great opportunity for you to do some feedback and to tell the right people why that's too much and where the constraints for you and your team lie. So sometimes if the expectations are greater than what you or your team can achieve, it could be because they don't have the context about like what is blocking your team or what your constraints are. So it's really, really important. And, working with your manager so that they have the right information to give to their peers and the people who are managing them so that they can kind of feed that up the chain is really critical. And sometimes that can be really difficult for teams if the culture of the company isn't set up to be able to talk about, problems or difficulties. If there's like a, kind of toxic positivity culture can prevent that. So figuring out ways in which you can talk about what the problems are without it being kind of, without you feeling like you're being too vulnerable or admitting too much weakness. Like, it is what's going to allow your team to have a shared sense of reality with management, is if you're all on the same page. And that means they need to share the context with you and you need to share your context with them. So it has to go both ways.
I think part of that also, if more is being expected of you and your team, then you also kind of need to be asking for more back. Like if more needs to come from us, well, then we need more headcount, or we need a larger budget for user research. And sometimes maybe you don't need more, it's rather we need to be more efficient with what we have. And so, identify those holes, and whether that's through training or whatever it may be. But, it's important to kind of have those conversations of, if you feel like you're performing at maximum efficiency and you're being expected to do more, then, you do need to kind of sometimes push back and say, well, we need more in return in order to do more. Yeah, it's important to first make sure you're at maximum capacity and efficiency, and then, be willing to ask back for, larger budget or more headcount or the resources you need to succeed in order to meet those expectations without burning out the team.
On that last point, I mean, I agree completely with what both of you have said, right? So when all of this is happening, you're managing outside of the team. You also have to remember that you are the buffer for inside your team while all of this is happening, right? So, if there is a lot of pressure coming in, you want to make sure that pressure does not build up on your team members, on your reports. And if it does, it's really good to have a relationship with them such that they can bring that up to you, right? So you do need to kind of, I don't like the word shield, because you never want to, become opaque. You don't want to put an opaque wall between the reports and the rest of the company, but you do need to sort of absorb some of the impact of, the bigger items that are moving. Because ultimately your job as their manager is to clear their path so they can get their work done, right? And so if their path is being blocked by stress and demands and, changes in priority, you need to clear that stuff out of their way, right? And doing it by managing the expectations, by, asking for more, or even just being an ear for them to talk about it and let them know how you're trying to address it.
That's great, thank you. I'd love to hear a little bit about, I think somebody mentioned earlier on, like when they first became a manager, they were a terrible manager. Like, what was some of the, I think it was you, Tara, what were some of the mistakes that you made as an early manager, and how did you kind of learn from those mistakes? Maybe we can start with you, Tara.
Sure, I'm happy to. I think ultimately my biggest mistake was I didn't really understand what management was. I was, very young. And so I don't think I was as much of a manager as I was a boss, right? So everything that I have come to learn and believe about management, about leading people, about growing people, was simply not present. So understanding that I am there to serve them, I am there to help them grow, I am there to clear their path, right? I am there also to have fun in the design jams because I don't get to go into the fooling anymore. Like there's like a whole bunch there, which was just all missing context, right? So how do you avoid that? I think anybody right now in this panel just learned how to avoid that, right? You have to know what is your management style, how you want the team to grow, how you want to be a leader, and then you just need to go and find that information and practice. You will make mistakes. give yourself grace, ask for grace, and get some mentorship. Definitely get some mentorship. It will go a lot faster that way.
Mitch or Millie, anything to add there?
I'm so fresh. I'm probably making mistakes now and not even realizing it, but I'm trying so hard to keep an open mind. And it's so important, I'm kind of this weird spot where I'm kind of, I'm still an individual contributor over a team, but I'm hiring someone to replace me and, eventually be full on management. And it's kind of a tricky balance of, I need to be kind of less opinionated when it comes to designs or design reviews. Like, I need to kind of take a step back, think about the holistic picture, and just think, with any change, people might suddenly perceive you differently, or, oh, they're a manager now, I don't want to make these comments around them, and just have to be very sensitive, very careful. And I'm sure I'm still making mistakes, but trying to be as open as possible and have just very candid relationships with my peers, so they still feel like they can share things with me when things aren't going well, or, I want feedback from them the same way Millie's mentioning one of your most important duties is to get feedback. As a manager, you also need to be willing to take feedback, especially when you're new and you're still iterating, you're still experimenting and finding your own style. So, yeah.
I think probably the two big things for me that have been like the difference between being like a new, maybe terrible manager to an experienced, okay manager is firstly, I think as a designer and maybe as a person, I'm an advocate personality. I'm very I believe what I believe, and I want to champion that. And I think that's probably common to a lot of designers. And one of the big things about management has been really understanding that everything is kind of a gray area, that there's so much of it is about compromise, and you can come in with a vision and a management philosophy, and you can read a book and you can want to implement a thing, and the reality is what works for them might not work for you, and there's a lot of different reasons why. And so it's never this is good and this is bad, or we should do this and not this, but it's always somewhere in between and some combination of things, and figuring out that nuance and that gray area and being comfortable with that has been a big transformative thing. And the second thing is a bit trickier to talk about, but I think just understanding how much of management is really about, and I mean this in very don't take this the wrong way, but it's really about understanding power a lot within the organization. So who has power and how are they using it? And I think we often give power gets a really bad rap, and we think about people who have power shouldn't have power, but there's a concept from Priya Parker's work called generous authority, and I think management really works really well with that for me, because it's this idea of being able to have power in a way that makes people feel safe and make decisions confidently in a way that people trust you and that allows them to have their autonomy and do their work, and being comfortable with the power that you have so that people feel comfortable around you and in their own work is a really interesting thing to learn how to do, and is a real difference between being kind of a bit unsure of yourself to being a bit more able to hold that space for other people.
Yeah, I feel like they're kind of having comfort with that kind of newly gained authority and power, is probably a really big thing for a lot of new managers, and especially kind of managing their imposter syndrome, in this new role. How would you have any kind of recommendations for how people kind of adapt to that kind of new authority and power?
It's an adjustment. It will take you a little while. I think having a team of mentors and advisors and coaches and people around you who can help you when you kind of come out maybe out of a difficult meeting and you're second guessing how you acted, or you need a triangulation for a decision that you're making, or you need someone to just give you a confidence boost before you go and do something that is challenging. It's going to be a lot harder to do that totally on your own. Hopefully your boss is the person that is going to help you, your manager is going to be that person for you, but that's not always the case. So I feel really lucky to have worked with an amazing coach who was really, really helpful for me in a lot of this work, and was able to help me see different perspectives on situations that allowed me to unlock ways that I could move forward within them when it felt like there wasn't a path. And I think that's often what power is in this kind of role. It's understanding like how you can essentially problem solve and where you can draw that power from. And sometimes it's relational, and sometimes it's internal, and sometimes it's something else. And it's almost the kind of thing that feels a bit magical before you've done it. And once you learn how to use it, it becomes something that becomes second nature.
Mitch or Tara, anything you'd like to add there?
I mean, imposter syndrome, I feel like you'll just, every time you try something new or do something new or become something new, you will always feel it. I think many of us felt that way when we got our first UX role. You just kind of feel like, I don't know what I'm doing, but they hired me and I'm pretending like I know what I'm doing. But yeah, I'm seeing a lot of comments about, peer advisory board, and it's so important to have those people that you can talk to and that can reassure you or help, point out some flaws in your thinking or the way you're acting. And yeah, I think it's just so important to have those people to help you. Any manager, you're going to also have your manager. And so you do have like a dedicated resource there, but beyond them, you can also find other people within your company or outside your company. Seeing a lot of people mention the ADPList. That's another great resource for finding those mentors, those sounding boards, those people to help you. So, yeah.
I'm going to jump to a question that's come through. I think we've got a few in the backlog now. How do you create design specific goals and performance reviews? I guess, yeah. How do you? Does anybody kind of have any immediate thoughts on this?
I mean, are you looking for goals for your reports? Goals, because there's goals.
That's how I'm interpreting it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm a big document person, right? So if there's a grid or a thing that I can write down and refer to, if there is a milestone, I can put it on paper. I always find it helpful. So, that's how I'm going to express myself here. So I have, that you can use, there's like design levels, there's a skills matrix, like there are all of these things. So what I like to do with the folks that report to me is when they come in, they're like, I level them, right? And we level together. So we go and we look at the grid and we say, okay, these are the different skills. Where are you at with these different things? Which are the ones that you want to develop? Which are the ones that the company needs you to develop? And what does develop look like, right? So actually defining the types of things that they will be doing, things that they will accomplish on projects, which will indicate that they have in fact started to learn that skill. And then if they repeat it over, then they have like acquired the skill. And skills can be, hard skills, soft skills, whatever it is. And in doing so, sort of like across all of these different skill sets, they start moving up. And so when we do, I don't love the word performance review, but when we do an assessment, we kind of like catch up, like once a month, once a quarter, whatever it is that you're doing, break out that matrix, talk about it. And it is collaborative. Like I have, as a manager, like I'll put my assessment and I'll ask them to give me theirs, and we kind of like pull it together. And their assessment isn't like, oh, I did great. It's like, I worked on these projects. These are the skills. This is how far I got on that scale that we talked about. It's really a lot more objective than sort of like, I feel like I made progress, right? So anything that you can do to write it down and refer back to it is always going to help and make it collaborative.
This might be a little controversial to say, but I think that one thing that I've worked at quite a few different organizations. Like one of my career, maybe to some people looks a bit patchy, but I feel very lucky to have had the diverse experience that I've had. And one thing that I've noticed is that design even though there's obviously a strong like shared practice, can look quite different in different organizations, and different companies at different stages need different things, and different teams with different compositions need different things, and different strengths and weaknesses of different individual contributors, you know, causes a different kind of design for design, I guess. And I think part of the role of design manager is about understanding that context of how design fits into the company and into the strategy, and what kind of design practice you need to build. Like, do you need to build a design system, or do you need to work on, you know, people's individual craft of putting together interfaces? Like, do you need to, is research the most critical thing, or is it actually something else that you should be focusing on? And you know, there's obviously, that's not to say that any of those things should never be done, or you should always, you know, think about skipping them, but you really have to understand, like, you know, what is the exact design culture that you're trying to build, and design that culture. And I think when you're giving people those, you know, those pointers about where they need to improve, it should be in the context of the whole team and the whole design function, and the way that you're constructing that holistically. So I think, you know, that means that you're understanding individual strengths and weaknesses, but you're understanding the contextual needs at the same time. And your job is to kind of mediate and connect those two.
I think it's important to have just regular communication and follow through. I always laugh when you know, there's those statistics of how many people set a New Year's goal. And then, you know, by February, the month we're in now, like only 15% people have kept that goal. And I've never been a fan of, like, you know, setting these huge goals and then we don't, you know, you don't talk about it till 6 months later. I think it's important, like, if there is a goal, to make it concrete and measurable and specific, and then follow up every, you know, in your one-on-ones every week. You know, how are we doing on that goal? Or do you feel like that's still the right goal? Do we need to pivot? Nothing's worse than just, you know, setting lots of grand goals, forgetting about them a few weeks later, and then maybe a performance review 6 months later, like, oh, how did you do on those? And oh, those aren't really my goals anymore. So, you know, just make sure to regular follow-up, make sure to adapt if the goal's no longer the right goal, whether it's because the business needs change or the individual's desires change, then yeah, like adjust, pivot, keep up to date on those, and make it a regular part of conversations, instead of the surprise 6 months later, oh, that was a goal, I forgot about that.
Millie, one of the things that you said earlier was kind of being able to sit in that discomfort when you're giving feedback, and kind of having that emotional maturity. And I guess kind of everybody starts at, or everybody probably comes into management at different levels there. Like, what advice would you have for somebody to be able to kind of improve at that?
Yeah, the most, one big breakthrough for me, I guess, was really trusting that people are okay and people will recover, and they might not recover immediately, and they might not take it perfectly. Like, no one is ever going to, like, I think I have slightly high standards, kind of perfectionistic tendencies. And I think the way that this was manifesting for me earlier on with this feedback journey was, I would really like fret about, like, what is the perfect time and way and wording to give this feedback, and you use that as a way to kind of procrastinate and like put it off and fuss about it. And the truth is that, like, giving the feedback sooner is always going to be better. So the longer that you fuss about trying to get it perfect in order to try to prevent someone from having a bad reaction, because you think that if you deliver the feedback perfectly, then they will take it perfectly and everything will be right with the world and no one will ever have a bad feeling. That is a toxic management behavior. And the faster that you can train yourself out of that, and that means that understanding what I think everyone has some sort of like immediate kind of gut reaction or knee-jerk reaction to something, but I kind of think of everyone as having a cool down period, and they kind of then return to their baseline of being okay. And different people take longer or shorter times to recover from things like that. And recover makes it sound like it's an injury, like it's, you know, feedback is a gift, but that, you know, initial feeling of like, oh, that maybe harmed my ego a little bit, or that was hard for me to hear. Once you have really learned to trust that people will, like, even if it hurts a little bit, it stings a little bit the first time, that they'll come back to you and that they'll be grateful even for hearing it, that will allow you to have the confidence to deliver that feedback more openly and genuinely, with candor, but also with kindness, and most critically, like in the moment or shortly after, so that it makes sense to them. And I think that has been difficult, but really, really important to learn how to do. And it's something that you can use outside of work, obviously, as well. You know, that's something you can use in your relationships. And yeah, I think it's that moment of maybe seeing it sting with someone. It will sting you a little bit, but you have to trust that they're going to come back from it.
And I'll jump in and say yes, you do get it in all of your various relationships. And it's interesting when you see, like, there's books on management, there's books on, you know, managing difficult conversations, books on, you know, this plays out in even in, you know, parenting books. A lot of times we'll pick up on these same set of skills, you know, sit in your discomfort, let them have, you know, let them have their moment. But also the follow-up for that is also, you know, let them know, especially if they're struggling, let them know that, you know, they can do it. You know, like, I know you need a cool down period. Like, let's talk about it tomorrow. It can be like, you know, for any of us, and I'm sure we've all been on the other side of that at some point, right? And when you receive something, the harder the feedback is, the more you're leaning towards a reaction, right? Because it's so close emotionally. And so just giving somebody the permission to say, like, you're going to need to cool down from this. I love that expression too. It was perfect. It just gives them permission to do it, right? And it makes them feel like, oh, okay, I'm normal. This is fine. I'll be okay, right? That's it.
I think one of the most important things you can do, I mean, you never know when you're going to have to give feedback. You never know when, you know, the person you're reporting, the person you're over makes a mistake or something happens. You just never know what's going to happen. But you can always proactively make sure you're building a genuine relationship with each of those individuals. It's so much easier to give sincere feedback if you have a positive, sincere relationship. If you don't have that relationship, you don't know that individual, then it's going to be really hard for them to take that. It's going to feel cold. It's going to, you know, not be as productive. And so you just have to, you don't know when it's going to happen, but right now you can just start building genuine relationships and getting to know them. It makes it so much better than telling a stranger really harsh feedback, because they might not trust you. They might not know if they can trust you. And this is really important to have that trust and relationship.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I feel like, you know, it makes such a difference to kind of create that you know, safety in those environments, and, you know, I guess lay the groundwork for giving some of that more difficult feedback sometimes. A question from Jacob Mills. Career progression tracks have been typically kind of single lane for most of our careers. You start as junior, mid, senior, lead manager. What do you think needs to change to encourage growth in people who don't necessarily want to be in management positions, but also don't want to kind of hit a ceiling in their career?
I've been a big proponent of, there's a lot of talk about this, that management isn't the same thing as leadership. You know, to be a manager, it's helpful if you're a good leader, but they're two very different skills. And, you know, anyone can be a leader. Even the newest designer and intern, they can start leading initiatives. They can start influencing others. There's so many things you can do as an individual contributor to start being a leader. And unfortunately, I feel like most companies don't really promote that growth path. They kind of put manager and leader together. And so if you want to lead out on vision and strategy and influence, and make the assumption you have to be a manager to do that. But I don't believe that's true. I think, you know, an individual contributor, a senior or principal designer, could be even more influential than a manager. And so important to recognize that growth path of, you can still be a leader and not be a manager. Unfortunately, a lot of companies don't recognize that, or people don't recognize that, and it's not built into that growth track.
Millie or Tara, any thoughts on that one?
I think 100% to what Mitch said. I think I am seeing more and more of these kind of principal roles around, but I think the thing to understand is for both the management track and the IC track for design, it's going to be related to how mature design is within your organization and how big the design discipline is. And, it's going to be really difficult for you to become, the VP of design if there's already a VP of design, or, if you're going to, even if being a principal, if there's only like 3 designers, like, does that make sense? So I think, it's those kind of progressions are going to be more common in your larger organizations where design is a much bigger discipline. But also, I think if you look at like the engineering discipline, I think they've done a bit of a better job of like having that IC track being more accepted, and you see a lot more kind of staff engineers, and I don't see a lot of kind of staff designer roles, and I don't think we have those levels just yet. So it's probably a combination of where design is at within certain organizations, and then where design is at like more generally, and how high does the ladder go? Because it's obviously very common to have a CTO, but we're not really as commonly represented in the C-suite, and so therefore like the levels of progression on both those tracks probably doesn't go as high. So it's to some extent I think it's a reflection of where design is at in its overall evolution. But I think, any managers who are here and anyone who is working within their organizations, I 100% think you should be making sure that there is an individual contributor track, because management is a skill and it is like a thing that you have to learn how to do. And it's not necessarily something that everyone is going to want to do or be good at. So, it's a shame to say that the only way that you can progress is to become a manager if it's just not something that you want to do.
Another question from Ali Russell in the chat. How do you find a mentor? I've been thrown into management and I'm struggling to get the resources and respect that we and I need to support them. Our team is very dev focused. Tara, do you have any perspective on this?
Sure. I think the very quick, obvious answer is you can go on ADPList. I don't want to be an advertisement for them, but there are plenty of us senior folks who are on there, and it's a pleasure to mentor folks and really see them grow. Another thing is, there's plenty of different design communities, and I'm sure all of us have sort of our favorite places to go. One of the ones that I like, it's on Facebook, though I know some folks even have a Facebook account just to be in this one particular group. And it's called Designers Guild. There is a high representation of very senior designers in there. And so I find that the conversation tends toward that direction, and there's a lot of, peer help. And even, I was in there one time, I was like, I don't know, I have this problem. And literally someone just call me. I got on a phone and spoke to this person for an hour. And it was, the best hour. So I think find your communities. Those are a couple that I, mentioned, but find your communities and then don't be afraid to ask for help in them, right? We're all designers. We're all highly empathetic. We want to help, right? It's kind of the best community to be in if you're going to be in a community to ask for help.
Kind of along with that, there's formal mentorship communities like ADPList, but these in other communities, like maybe it's a LinkedIn group or a Facebook group. I think one of the best ways, you don't always have to ask someone, will you be my mentor? It can sometimes kind of come off a little weird, and it feels like a huge time commitment for that individual, the person you're asking. But if anyone just ask a specific, well-articulated question, hundreds of people are more than happy to answer that question. And so just recognize, not every mentorship has to be a formal, I ask you to be my mentor, you accept, we're now mentor-mentee. There is a place for that, but there's also just take advantage of informal mentorship. I think some of my favorite mentors, they don't even know I exist. I literally follow them. I always see their comments whenever they speak on a podcast or whatever. I've learned so much from them, and I always follow their content or their thoughts or read their book. And to me, they've been such influential mentors that have helped me shape the person I am, and they have no idea. And that can still be a form of seeking a mentor, of that person's still influencing me and impacting me.
I had a really amazing mentor early on in my career, like before I was in management. And one thing that I felt really grateful for was her ability to push me forward when I was feeling a bit insecure, and to really vouch for me and to tell me things that I probably needed to hear but wasn't getting from the people around me. I remember she told me to like present at a conference when I had never presented at a conference before, and she was like, of course you can present, you know, like you have amazing knowledge about this, like why wouldn't you? And I was like, well, I'm just nobody, like why would I present at this conference? And I ended up presenting, and it was, you know, it was a great experience. But even though I think you're right, you can have many mentors who, you know, maybe they don't even know who you are, there's something very special about having someone who is a bit of a cheerleader for you and who can give you kind of that personal touch of, I believe in you. And I think mentorship can be really powerful in that way. It's kind of different to coaching in some ways. A coach is probably someone who is going to ask you hard questions that maybe help you with your development. And a mentor can be someone who maybe is a bit further along, you know, in their journey, and can tell you a bit like what it's like here, a bit further down the path, and also help you figure out how you might come and meet them there.
I'm just conscious that we have a couple minutes left before the schedule end. I want to give everybody a quick chance to kind of plug where people can find you. I mean, first of all, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today and hear all of your amazingly thoughtful responses. I'm also just moving into management, so I'm like taking notes furiously and excited to put a lot of this into practice. But yeah, maybe we could start with Tara. Where can people find you?
I'm everywhere. Tara Kelly, Twitter, LinkedIn. I am on Facebook. I am in Designers Guild. I am on ADPList. I am putting a book out, which you will probably get an email if you want to go and claim a copy. So it's kind of easy to find me, Tara Kelly.
Thank you. And Millie, how about yourself?
I'm unfindable. No, I just you can find me on ADPList. I'm just, you know, my Twitter is I wouldn't say a particularly useful resource unless you like, you know, like late stage capitalism memes, which is probably my main posting. And my LinkedIn is just LinkedIn. I think it's kind of boring, but I would love to have a conversation with anyone who would love to reach out. My ADPList is open, and yeah, I would love to be the mentor or the coach for the people who are looking for that.
And Mitch, how about yourself?
I'm also not everywhere. No. I think the most global place to find me is LinkedIn. Can go ahead and post a link in the chat, but yeah, more than happy to help answer any questions that weren't able to get asked. That was a fast hour.
I know, time flew by. We'll see if we can get some answers to the questions that I didn't get to in the backlog. Don't forget to come back in about 5 hours time, everybody. There's another panel, Scaling Impactful Design Teams. It's at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, or 11 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time if you're a bit of a night owl. And that's with Dineth Mappa, Director of Product Design at AirWallet, Crystal and Demesa, Senior Director of Product Design at CM Group, Sammy Sloan, Head of Design at Safety Culture, Tim Yo, Design Director at IBM and Chief Introvert at Quiet Achiever, and of course hosted by Lizzie Shappy, Senior Director Design at Deputy. So it's a pretty stacked panel, and we'd love to see you there.